Hello, my name is John Gibson, and along with my co-author Kerima Gibson from the University of Waikato in New Zealand, I'm pleased to present our research poster, Reasons for Retraction Affect the Impact on Citations. And so there's a large literature which is studying the impact of retractions of articles from peer-reviewed journals, and this literature can be broken into two broad parts. Some studies focus on the impacts of the retraction, and so they look at articles that are retracted and they construct control groups of unretracted articles, and they compare the time path of the citations for the two groups to see, well, what was the actual impact of the retraction on the scholars and on the research field. Other studies look at the reasons for the retraction, and things such as Retraction Watch and the retraction notices themselves often give a wide variety of reasons, but we can group these into two broad types. And so some retractions are because of what we might think of as the bad behavior or the unethical behavior of the researchers. And so this could involve plagiarism or self-plagiarism, manipulation of peer review, perhaps suggesting fake reviewers. It might involve violating of research ethics, of privacy, and so on and so forth. Now, people may engage in bad behavior because they're trying to shield results which are unreliable from critical review, but per se we can't know, or we can't know a priori whether or not papers that are retracted because of the bad behavior of the authors were in some sense unreliable, whether the results were unreliable or not. In contrast, the second broad reason for retractions is because of the falsification or outright fabrication of the data, because of errors in the analysis in the data. And for those sorts of studies, then we actually think of these as having results which are unreliable, which we in shorthand simply call dodgy results. And so what our research does is try to link these two broad parts of the literature, because we examine whether or not the reason for the retraction affects the impact on citations, which has not previously been studied. And so our research is based on a database of articles that were originally published in psychology journals. So we have 143 articles in our treatment group, and these are a subset of 160 articles recently studied by Craig et al. In Research Policy, and these are retracted articles and various reasons for the retraction. We construct a control group of nearest neighbor articles, and these nearest neighbor articles are ones which were either immediately before or immediately after the retracted article in the issue of the particular journal. So if it was a lead article that was retracted, it only has one nearest neighbor, the following paper. If it was the last article in a journal, it only has one nearest neighbor, the immediate article beforehand, and otherwise it's sandwiched in between its two control groups members, which are the articles published immediately before and after it. And the advantage of this research design is that it will control automatically for the age pattern of citations, because the control group articles are of the same age as the retracted articles. It will control for the journal impact factors, because the control group articles come from the same journals as the retracted articles. And it will even control for the effective position within the journal issue. Certainly before widespread online publication, articles which occurred earlier in issues tended to be cited more. So for all 402 articles, the 143 treatment group articles and the 259 control group articles, we obtained data on their citations, including citation pattern by year, from both Google Scholar and from Web of Science. And so this is about 20,000 citations in Web of Science and about 50,000 citations in Google Scholar. And so here's the first key result. And so the articles which were retracted because of bad behavior, and so these ones over here, there's no penalty for them in terms of having lower citations than their control group articles, the nearest neighbor articles. In contrast, The articles which were retracted for the broad reason of having dodgy results, so data fabrication, data falsification, errors in data, or errors in analysis, have substantially fewer citations measured in early 2021 compared with the citations to their control group, the nearest neighbor articles. And the bars here are the 95% confidence intervals, which don't overlap at all. These patterns hold if we use regression analysis, and in the regression table here, we are controlling for the age of the articles, the amount of time since the retraction, and we use either Web of Science or Google Scholar, and we use either regressions through the mean, ordinary least squares, or regressions through the median. And what we see is that the gap in citations, the amount by which the control group articles have more citations than the retracted articles, is 0.2 standard deviations smaller if the reason for the retraction was author bad behavior, and it's 0.2 standard deviations larger if the reason for the retraction was falsification or fabrication of data, errors in data analysis, what we call overall dodgy results there. Okay. Now, in terms of the timing of when does this gap open up, well, a small gap was starting to emerge before the retraction notice was published. We don't know when the retraction notices were first available, whether they were available online before being published or not. But the vast majority of the gap between the time path of citations for the retracted articles and the time path of citations for the nearest neighbor control group articles occurs after the retraction. And so this difference in difference analysis enables us to attribute the gap in citations to the impact of the retraction itself rather than some pre-existing differences. And so to wrap up this short presentation, then what we see is that the retraction of articles in psychology journals has a big impact on citations, but only when the reason for the retraction is due to unreliable findings from either fabrication or falsification from data, or from errors in the analysis or errors in the data. If the retraction is for other reasons, such as the unethical behavior of authors by self-plagiarizing, plagiarizing others, manipulating citations, manipulating peer review, not having full ethical clearances and so forth, then all of these forms of bad behavior of authors don't appear to lead to any penalty in the form of reduced citations. So further analysis is needed to see if there's other forms of penalty for which these authors might be sanctioned, and whether these patterns which we've found here for psychology journals would hold in other disciplines. And so we thank you very much for your attention to our poster. If you would like to follow up with us, then email address, Google Scholar profile, and REPEC details are here. And so thank you very much for your attention to our poster.